Ladies and gentlemen, you are tuned into another episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. I'm honored to be in your ear. And this interview you're about to hear is with Jim Shaw. For the uninitiated, he is a keyboard player, music engineer, and a songwriter. He was the business manager, keyboardist, and band leader with Buck Owens and the Buckaroos, the group of country music legend Buck Owens. He keeps the legacy of Buck Owens alive with Buck Owens Productions. Jim Shaw, thank you very much for making the time to speak with me.
Very much my pleasure.
So I think most stories are best from the beginning. You're originally from Iowa?
Born in Esterville, Iowa, correct. But we moved out, and when I was about 6 years old, my family moved out to California, like many other people in the Midwest did. And about 52, moved to the seaside Monterey, and then a year later to Fresno, California, which is in the valley with Bakersfield. The Central Valley of California is where a lot of people moved during the Dust Bowl. It's kind of the agriculture part of California.
Tell me about the music that you remember most from growing up.
Oh, when I grew up, I listened. My mom and dad would listen to big band and things like that. And by the time I got into rock and roll, I was probably 14 or 15 years old, like most kids that age, and started playing a little bit on the piano and on the bass, and just in a little local, actually a high school band. And then the Beatles came along in the mid-'60s and turned everything upside down wonderfully. And I got into that kind of music. And it wasn't until I started, I wanted to start playing in the clubs. So when I wanted to go to college, I wanted to have some way to make a living. And someone said, if you want to work 6 nights a week, you should play country music, because that's where all the action is and in these bars that have bands every single night of the week. And I had not even been exposed to country music. My mom and dad didn't listen to it, but I had no preconceptions or prejudice, and gave it a listen and enjoyed it. And in fact, did start working with a local group. And it was very nice of them to let me play piano with them, because I didn't know a thing about country music and had to learn on the bandstand. But they allowed me to do that, and I kind of worked my way up through the local Fresno, California music scene.
So as you were exposing yourself to this country music, were there any particular artists that you exposed yourself to, or that you in particular listened into?
Well, specifically one thing that was interesting to a piano players, there was a monstrous hit at about that time called, when I started playing country, called Last Date by Floyd Cramer. And that Floyd Cramer type style piano was pretty much the epitome of country piano. And so I have a pretty decent ear, so I got a copy of the record and tediously learned how to copy every little note on that record. And then I took those licks and learned how to do them in all the different keys. And that particular song was my training for country music keyboard. Nowadays, you would have gone on YouTube and found hundreds of people willing to show you how to do it. But at that time, there was no other way to do it. And I loved the music of the 4/4 shuffles of Ray Price and those things. And I was very much aware of Buck Owens. At that time, he had the song Buckaroo, the instrumental, and he had Tiger by the Tail and Act Naturally and those things. And I was very aware of him, and hadn't thought much of the idea that he was 100 miles away down in Bakersfield at the bottom of the valley. But he and a year or two later, Merle Haggard were making a lot of noise down there. So that was kind of exciting knowing they were that close.
You just mentioned Floyd Cramer and that great song, Last Date. Could you tell the listeners maybe about some of the other piano players that you admire and maybe have had an influence on your playing?
Well, Again, my piano playing was very basic, and in the rock and roll thing was a lot of pounding and just knowing the three chords, and I was homeschooled in a sense, and there was buy music for this kind of a thing. So I was listening to. At that point, I started listening to country music and didn't know who I was listening to in these Nashville musicians. There was a guy named Hargus Robbins, who was known as Pig Robbins, and he was a blind piano player that played on most of the country records out of Nashville. He was on the A team, and I was obviously influenced a lot by him, and then of course Charlie Rich. Although I think Hargus Pig Robbins actually played piano on Charlie Rich's big hits behind closed doors, although Charlie was a decent piano player. But I was just kind of, I used to call it, you'd learn a new lick, you're putting tools in your toolbox. You learn how to play this little lick and then that little lick, and when you know 15 licks and start stringing them together, everybody can kind of see what you're doing. They said, okay, I see what he's doing. It's those things over and over. But it's not until you get hundreds and then thousands of those things in your toolbox and know when to pull them out, does it finally start becoming seamless, and you start sounding a little more professional and like you have a style. But everybody borrows from everybody else in any kind of music. And like you started out with the question, who was I influenced by? I think I just kept, anytime I hear something that was good, I'd add it to that. I was in college. I was very busy doing this at night, going to college during the day, and didn't have a lot of time to sit around and listen to a lot of music at that time, like I do nowadays. But I'd say it was more of a practical matter of just trying to add to my licks.
Can you tell us about the first time you ever went to Bakersfield, California?
Well, I've told the story before, and it's kind of like a B movie scene. It's really the epitome of right place at the right time. But in Fresno, I had eventually got to the point where I had my own band and was doing very well at a place called the Nashville West. And we actually had our own local TV show. So I was a big star in Fresno, which isn't worth very much. But I decided that, hey, Buck Owens has built a new recording studio in Bakersfield. I've heard about it. And it's available to rent. And maybe I could take my band down there. We could record an album, sell it using our TV show, sell it to the club we're working at, Nashville West, and make a little extra money and spread our music out a little bit. So I went down on a weekday to Bakersfield to check out the recording studio, get some brochures, get some rates, see what it looked like, and that was my only intention. Happened to be there the day Buck was recording, and he at that time did not have a piano player in the band. You would use somebody from the outside to play piano on his sessions because he wanted him on the session. And he had been working in Los Angeles with the session players there, but he had just started in Bakersfield, did not have anybody locally available, and was trying out a guy named David Frizzell, who later on became a country music star himself with a couple of hit records. But he supposedly knew a little piano, rhythm piano, and Buck was trying him out on that session that day. And it was not going well. It was a kind of a tricky little song with a lot of weird chords in it, and then a modulation to the key of G flat. And as a piano player, it was ugly, tough. And there's no printed music. You have to be able to write a little shorthand chart down and quickly learn the song after 2 or 3 times through and play it without a mistake. And he was failing, and Buck was getting frustrated. And somebody told Buck that there was a piano player from Fresno out front. And so he came and got me. He went through 2 or 3 sets of doors, came to the front lobby. It scared me to death. I mean, because he was a huge star. He was like Garth Brooks at that time. He was a big star, and there he was right in front of me. And he said, "Are you a piano player?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Can you play that song?" I didn't know what he was talking about because I didn't know what was going on way back in that studio. There's no way, and I'm not sure why he thought I would know what he thought I was hearing. But anyway, I went in there and they played the song through for me, and I was terrified, to tell you the truth. I thought, wow, this is tricky. And I tried to keep track of what was going on, when it modulated, what it did. And he said, "Are you ready to do one?" And I said, "Okay." And I got through it. And then he sent David Frizzell home. He says, "I'm sorry it didn't work out. I'll pay you for the recording session." He said to me, he says, "Can you stay for the rest of the recording session?" I said, "Yes, I can." "Yes, sir." And I did my first Buck Owens recording session. Right place at the right time.
Now, was this your first time in a recording studio, like a real record?
I had played little in studios in Fresno, not to that caliber, but enough to kind of know what to do, how to, keep quiet. And it's interesting when you're playing in a recording studio as a musician. It's totally different than being on stage. When you're getting ready to record a song, especially in those days when everybody's recording at the same time, and it was very difficult to fix a mistake. You basically had to do it over again. As you're playing through the song and running it down, and this held true for years afterwards. When you're playing the song down, there's no big worries. You're trying this, you're trying that. You're just having a good time playing it. And you're not afraid of taking a chance, and you're doing all these neat little licks and say, "Hey, that's kind of cool," and trying to come up with what this record's going to sound like. As soon as that red light goes on, like, okay, let's go ahead and make it take, everybody becomes careful. Human nature, right? You don't want to be the guy, we got to start over because Jim Shaw screwed it up. We were almost done, and he made a big old mistake, tried to play this little lick and messed it up. So you pull back, you start cringing and playing very careful and very much on the defensive. And that's probably the difference between somebody who's a terrific recording musician and somebody who's just a good one. The ones that can just go out there and go for it and come up with these fresh, clever ideas and not be intimidated. And that's how you become on the A team and a serious recording musician. And that's a small percentage. And I don't know if I'm one of those or not. Even after the decades that I did it, I'm sure I'm probably one of the timid ones.
Well, aside from, as you said, here's this man who's a big star. Aside from that, what was your first impression of Buck Owens when you were eyeball to eyeball with him?
That he was a very demanding boss. He had high expectations of everybody, and he's interesting though because as I soon was working for him full time, I realized he's the kind of guy that those high expectations really made you the best you could be. He never asked you to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He was the hardest worker in the room. Got up earlier, stayed up, worked later, and he expected everybody else to be just like him. And so if you could handle that, and a lot of people couldn't, they drifted away or were set free. But he had high expectations of everybody, and I could see that quickly. And it's interesting, that recording session I happen to know because there's a date on the box of the tape of that song that was recorded that day. Was March 8th, 1970, so a little while back. It was 50 years ago.
How about that?
And then in June 1st, which is not too far away, was that about 2-3 weeks, I guess. June 1st will be my 50th year as signing up as a Buckaroo, because that's when he called me in and asked me to join the Buckaroos. So 50 years, it's been a long, long ride being in the same place.
Absolutely. What about when you saw Buck Owens interact with fans of his? What was that experience like?
Well, Buck, again, being a hard worker, he considered being a country star a privilege, and that you had to earn it and you had to work hard. And not only fans, but disc jockeys. I mean, he treated them well. They had his full attention. And he would get up early in the morning in any city we were playing in and go and do the radio shows. And anytime he had a chance, he would do these interviews. And if somebody wanted an autograph and wanted a chance to see them, if he could do it, he was there for them. He was not the kind of person that hid away or felt that he was too good for that and past that. He even had a song called "It Takes People Like You to Make People Like Me." It was a big hit of his, and it was in tribute to the fans that bought the records and put him where he was.
It may be difficult, but can you pick a favorite Buck Owens tune?
Well, you have to realize that for decades, I traveled the band and played thousands of concerts, and every night I played Act Naturally and Together Again and Crying Time and, Love's Gonna Live Here and they're sort of like on cruise control, right? And so what happens is that you don't pick your favorites out of that generally. It's because it's something that you don't play very often. And the song for me would be Who's Gonna Mow Your Grass, which was kind of a jazz waltz kind of a thing and very different, very unique. We hardly ever played it live, and so when we did, I really enjoyed it. On the record, we played harpsichord on it, had a little lick, but a lot of the songs that we recorded in the studio that were hits, we didn't play that often on stage because on a show that's an hour long or something like that, you can only play 20, 25, 30 songs. Buck had 21 number one hits and a whole bunch of top tens. So you couldn't play all the songs on the show that he had that were hits. So he had to pick and choose.
Tell me about how you began to start writing songs yourself. How did that begin?
Well, Buck was very generous within the organization. He anytime he saw that somebody wanted to get into something else, he would encourage it. And if you wanted to write a song and bring it in, you didn't get any special precedence over other songwriters. He would try to go with the best song he could get. And I'm not talking about him as much. We had a whole stable of acts at that time. We had Susan Raye, his son Buddy Allen. We had Tony Booth. We had LaWanda Lindsay later, and Kenny Husky, and the Bakersfield Brass, and of course Don Rich put out his own things. And we had a lot of recording going on. Lots of things. People, the Hagers, we did them. And we also did, we recorded the country people for the Lawrence Welk show, like Ava Barber. And cause down there at Lawrence Welk, they didn't know how to record country, so we did them for them. So there was a lot of material needed, and Buck encouraged us to write, bring in songs, and you weren't treated special, like I said, but if you practiced at it and were good at it, and the songs that we did in those times were basic, simple songs. That's the kind of stuff he liked to do. I mean, if you look at Tiger by the Tail or the songs like this, there's not a lot of lyrics. They're not terribly complicated or clever, but they have to have a great hook to them, and kind of so you can reel people in with them. And the fact that that people want to hear the song again, and he was good at that kind of a song, very commercial. So as somebody like me who would analyze what he did and what he liked, it was easy for me to say, okay, this is the place to be and this is the kind of song to write. Later on, of course, I spread out and did different things. I think you might have already talked to Larry Bastian, and I met Larry Bastian back in the, I'm guessing, mid-'70s, and signed him as a songwriter. And I was running the publishing company by then, and started and wrote a lot of songs with Larry. But Larry was a terrific ballad songwriter and just one of the finest songwriters out there. And I learned a lot working with him, of course.
With Larry Bastian, did you find that there was a particular way that you all wrote together? What was it like writing with Larry Bastian?
Yeah, a lot of people used to ask, one of you does the music and one does the words, kind of like the thing back in the old day of, big band and stuff like that. There was a lyricist and a song and the music writer. But no, in country in general, and specifically by us, you get together, you just sit there, and you work through the song. You come up with an idea, and you knock ideas back and forth. He might be holding the guitar, I might have the piano in front of me. and you're just trying this and you're trying that and you have a relationship where you can brainstorm, and nobody makes fun of each other. Nobody says, well, that's the stupidest line I ever heard. You don't do that, because it's understood that I'm not saying this line I just threw out should be in the song. It's like, what if it went in this direction? You know what I'm saying? Just how about something like this? And the guys, and his response would be, yeah, but what if you did it like this? Well, what if the twist was here? And then you take that and you jump to, yeah, but why not add this word in there, make it a double rhyme? And you bat it back and forth like a tennis ball. And nobody makes fun of the other person, unless you're old friends enough that you have to throw a dig in every now and then. But you have to have a relationship with the person you write with. And I know this nowadays. Songs written in Nashville are pretty much written by a committee, it looks like. Everybody goes to appointments, goes in, has a songwriting appointment 2 or 3 times a day, and they put different writers, and they're looking for people that will click. And it's got, I don't know, it just almost feels computerized. Each song has 4, 5, 6 names on it, and really different. That's the way it turned into, but it certainly wasn't like that back in the 70s and 80s. And I'm glad I'm not involved today. I know that music's changing, and a lot of the country music that's being played today is not something that I enjoy listening to, and I have no problem with that. I know when Buck Owens came out, everybody thought he sounded too rock and roll, too much drums, you know. They wanted to listen to, Hank Snow and the people before him. So it's something that has to move on. I'm hoping we have another resurgence in classical country music, though. I'm waiting for that. But it's interesting how you write songs and all of a sudden realize that the music sort of drifted away from these things we're writing. There's not a lot of ballads anymore.
So what is Larry Bastian really like?
Oh, Larry's an absolute super guy. He's a biologist. He used to work for the Visalia, or maybe Tulare, County as a biologist, and he was out in the outdoors because he was tracking squirrels that carried the plague and doing a lot of interesting things. But he's Basque, a great family guy, beautiful, wonderful wife Myrna, and great kids, and just the sweetest man you'd ever want to meet, and just what a talent putting words together. Just a great guy. And I miss having him visit because of the virus. He's hunkered down at home, and he's in his 80s, and he needs to protect himself. And so, but yeah, he's one of my favorite people.
There's a song that you wrote with him. I want to get the story behind this song. It's been quite successful. Tom Jones did a version of it.
Oh, called This Ain't Tennessee. Yes.
Yes, sir.
And I have to, any song a lot of times is weighted towards one writer more than the other. He might bring in the idea and have a whole bunch of it figured out, and then need the other guy to help him complete it. And and Larry and I are like many teams. We don't keep score, but I'll tell you right now that he came in with the idea and a lot of the important lines written, and that was I was very happy to get involved in that song because it turned out to be a big song recorded by Janie, Fricke, and Sammy Smith, as well as, like you said, Tom Jones. Eddie Arnold recorded it, and of course Garth Brooks. That didn't hurt. But it's a song that People Magazine did a little. I think it was when Janie Fricke did it. They reviewed her album in People Magazine and mentioned that song and said it's always a cut, never a hit, kind of like the thing about a bride, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I think it was kind of a dig, but the song never has been a hit, although it's been recorded a ton of times. So we always hope, and we know that Garth and Trisha Yearwood recorded it as a duet a couple times, but never felt they got the right spark on it and didn't release it. So, we always kind of hope that they'll do something. Meanwhile, we've written many other songs that Garth is sitting on, and we're hoping he records. But all you do is kind of send him into that dark pit and kind of forget about him, because there's no way you can nudge people. Either down the road it's going to surface, and it's going to get recorded, or it's going to sink without a trace. It can be a depressing business. You better love to write songs, because if you're doing it just for the money, you might be sorely disappointed.
Well, on the note of Garth Brooks, there have been a lot of great artists who have mentioned how much they revered Buck Owens. When Bob Dylan was at that Music Cares thing, and he was mentioning, he was going all over the place talking about all different types of music. When he mentioned Buck Owens in particular, were you aware of Bob Dylan's admiration for Buck Owens? Did you know that?
Well, I sort of. It's interesting. I remember that somebody, not me, but somebody did a recording session with his son, Bob Dylan's son. I'm blanking on his name.
Jacob.
Thank you, Jacob. Was doing a recording session, and said that he remembers growing up for many years, all those years growing up, that on Saturday night they had to have everything done and schedule dinner so they could all sit down and watch Hee Haw. So that gave me an idea right there that Bob Dylan was paying attention. And Buck, I think Buck got a lot of attention from people like that, and admiration that you wouldn't expect. Like one of those guys in ZZ Top's, he had a guitar that on the fretboard, and it was inlaid, it said "Think Buck." Jerry Garcia many times said that he was a huge fan and of the Grateful Dead, and I think it was that Buck's music was kind of ahead of the time. At that time, had the drums and stuff, and they also realized that Buck was a bit of a rebel, and he was an innovator. And I think that strikes other entertainers, and strikes a chord with them. I think that's why a lot of acts like Bob Dylan might have paid compliments to him.
What's your opinion of the album Dwight Sings Buck that Dwight Yoakam recorded?
Well, I loved it. He put his own twist on it, but I've got one autographed by Dwight that says, "Hey Jim, thank you for being there for Buck for all those years." And I was very touched by that, and I enjoyed the album very much, and I thought it was a great tribute. He did his own take on some of them, and I thought that was extra cool, his interpretation.
I'm also hoping you can tell us about you being around Ringo Starr.
Well, that was a thrill for me. The Beatles were a huge part of my, my musical excitement when I was a teenager, and I think I was a senior in high school when they came out, and that was sort of the holy grail. I mean, meeting one of the Beatles would have been great. And so Buck we were gonna do a thing called the BAMIs. The BAMIs are the Bay Area Music Awards up in San Francisco every year, and a lot of the San Francisco people there, like Huey Lewis and the News, and the Grateful Dead, and Chris Isaacs, and Creedence Clearwater. All those people are up there in Northern California, and Ringo Starr was supposed to be in California at that time, and somebody had the great idea of, hey, why don't Buck and Ringo get together and do Act Naturally at the Grammys, because Ringo sang Act Naturally in 1966, I think, or so, on a Beatles album, covered Buck's hit of it. And so that didn't work. Ringo couldn't make it, but as soon as we had the idea, we started pressing it. We got a hold of Ringo's manager, and finally eventually connected with Ringo and set up a recording session at Abbey Road Studio in London, and Studio B, where the Beatles recorded at Abbey Road, and I got to produce it. So I was in hog heaven. We spent a week there in London, and I remember the first day, Ringo drives his own car into this little gravel parking lot, comes walking on in, no entourage, no valet or driver, just comes driving in and shakes hands all around, and starts chatting, and we just had a great time. Recorded the song. And that didn't take that much time, but then we just hung out a lot. I've got a wonderful picture sitting next to him and in the commissary, and he was a good guy. Told us all sorts of Beatles stories, and a lot of stories, musician to musician, as a band playing live. And saying that, when they were playing live on that first American tour at those concerts, he says at first they thought it was hilarious that the girls wouldn't stop screaming. And they'd start playing Happy Birthday and Jingle Bells, and they'd play anything they want up there. Nobody could even tell. They had no great sound systems, no big amplifiers in those days. They were at the mercy of, these little house systems or out in a ballpark, and nobody could even hear them. And he says all of a sudden that got old really quick, and pretty soon it was, hey, we want to play our music. Would you shut up? That was the attitude, and they got where they just hated it. And I could relate to that. Pretty soon you just feel like you'd be in a zoo, people looking at you through behind the bars and throwing you peanuts. And so it was very interesting. He took us around, showed us some of the air vents that the girls tried to crawl through to sneak into see if they could see the Beatles and when they were recording there. Great, it was great. And then not too long later, we met down in Los Angeles at Paramount Picture Films. They had a Western town there, and we shot the video. So, are we good buddies? Do we send Christmas cards? No, but I got a chance to meet him.
And that is very cool.
Yes, it is.
So, is there a driving force to your work? Is there like a greater purpose to what you do that keeps you moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. There certainly is, and I've been thinking about it a lot the last year or two. But probably because I'm 73 years old, and I started in this band when I was 23, and just a kid, and I had to drop out of college. I was almost finished being an engineer, industrial engineer, and so I thought I'd do it for a few years, and then it would fade away, and I'd go back to college, and I never dreamed I'd be 50 years in the same place. And Buck allowed me to wear these different hats, and we became close. We became friends. I have this loyalty to Buck. He's been gone a long time now, but I'm here every day running the foundation, and it has all his intellectual properties. In other words, all his masters, his music, his publishing. I license that. I take care of it. But there's also buildings full of things. There's guitars. There's cars. There's stuff. There's stuff that has to be dealt with, hundreds of boxes of documents and all these things that down the road, when I'm gone, no one's going to know what to do with it. I'm kind of the guy that they don't know that they come, now ask Jim, he'll remember why do we have that? What is that? Is it worth anything? What should we do with it? And so I'm kind of like the person that's, getting old and at their house, and they kind of want to deal with all their stuff so their kids don't have to deal with it, get all their affairs in order. I'm trying to do that for Buck, and that's important to me. That's why I don't want to retire yet. Besides, I wouldn't retire well. I've got to be doing something. So I come into the office. It's like my family here. A lot of these people have been here for many decades, and chip away and, try to deal with these things, selling stuff, giving stuff, figuring out what to do with the archives, one thing at a time. And, of course, we've got Buck Owens Crystal Palace to deal with. That's a huge thing, and that's very unsettling right now, whenever that's going to open up again. So, yeah, there's plenty to do every day.
What does Buck Owens mean to you?
I like the idea that we've talked about the Beatles. I thought that when Buck came on the scene, Buck did in country music exactly what Beatles did to pop music. We came out of a huge, big rock production with tons and tons of instruments and big sounds, and the Beatles came along and opened the door for a four-piece group. You could hear every instrument right in your face, not overdubbed and overarranged and overprocessed, just good, clean music. Buck did exactly the same thing when Nashville was doing the smooth country music with all the strings. They called it countrypolitan, and country music was sort of losing its spark in its life, and they're trying to cross over and sell more records to the pop people. So it was taking its toll on the hard country. So when Buck came along with this hardcore group, the Buckaroos, small group, I think he was fresh and breath of fresh air, and I liked the fact that he was a rebel and that he didn't pick up and move to Nashville with all the rest of them. He says, no, I'm going to do it in Bakersfield. And he thumbed his nose at him. A lot of people in Nashville did not like Buck Owens at that. That's long gone now. But at the time, it was like, what? You got to come to Nashville and use our recording musicians. And Buck says, no, I got a good band. I'll use them and do it in my own studio. And I'll write my own songs. And what really made him mad is he was terribly successful at it. He did some things on the charts that had not been done. Did you know that Love's Gonna Live Here went to number one? I think it was stayed at number one for 16 weeks.
Wow.
Do you realize how many Nashville records did not hit number one during that time because he was hogging the number one spot? Did you know that when My Heart Skips a Beat went to number one, you know what the number two song was at that time? It was the B side of My Heart Skips a Beat, which happened to be Together Again. And then the next week they flip-flopped. Together Again was number one. My Heart Skips a Beat was number two. The third week they flip-flopped again back. Yeah, he was frustrating the heck out of the people in Nashville. They weren't wild about that. Yeah, he was doing amazing things, getting on TV shows that had never had country music before. Ed Sullivan Show and all that. First show I played on when I joined the Buckaroos within the month was the Ed Sullivan Show. I was pretty knocked out. I thought that was a big deal. So anyway, he broke down walls and did things, and I respected that, enjoyed that, was proud to be working with him. He was difficult to work with sometimes, and I thought, okay, that's cool. He's the way he is because that's what it took to be who he is. I get it.
Well, when you consider all of these things that have made up your life, being on the Ed Sullivan Show, being around people like Ringo Starr, having a song you wrote recorded by people like Tom Jones, being able to play with someone like Buck Owens, a legend in music, what is the best thing about being Jim Shaw?
Well, that variety. It was never boring. He used to call it giving me a new hat. But when he owned a lot of radio stations. But I remember when he bought his first TV station, he said, "Okay, Jim, you're going to get a new hat. You got to learn about TV now." And it was always new adventures, new things to do, and never a dull moment. I couldn't be luckier that every morning I got to get up and look forward to going to work. That's a gift that any guy would have to say it's right up there at the top, doing what you love.
I always like to end the show. I give the guest the stage. It's not limited to music, but for anyone who's tuned in, totally open-ended. What would you say to them?
Wow, you've asked so many good questions. I think I've said everything I know, but I think it's the fact that I've gone through my life. A lot of times when you get stressed out, there has been a lot of stress in my job, and I've kind of had a mantra, and that I go back to all the time, and it's every time something comes up, I say, "Will this matter in 100 years?" And it's amazing what that's gotten me through. It's really, so you got some crabgrass. Big deal. So I think that's something everybody can take to heart.
Well, Jim Shaw, thank you very much for making the time to speak with me. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Paul. It's been fun for me, too.
You're a great interview subject.
Well, thank you.
All right, sir. Well, have a wonderful day. I appreciate it.
Okay, the same to you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Paul Leslie Hour. Hosted, written, and produced by Paul Leslie. Intro theme song, Alexander's Ragtime Band, written by Irving Berlin, performed by Dan Barrett. Outro scatting G Things, improvised, performed, and produced by John Goodwin. Until next time.
Goodbye.